So it's 2016. I'm a brand new recruiter. I'm struggling and I'm a little weird, right? Hello, it's Sergeant Reed with the United States Air Force. So I'm not really getting much traction. I'm not really getting much business. And I get a phone call from this major in the Air Force Reserve. And she says, hey, I got a daughter who's interested in joining the Air Force. So I'm like, what? Like, interested? And she's like, yeah, here's her number. You should give her a call. So I'm excited. So I call her daughter. She picks up the phone. She's like, hello, this is Mariah. I'm like, hey, it's Sergeant Reed with the United States Air Force. I start asking her all the questions. Everything's checking out. So everything's looking good. We set up an appointment. I tell her to come in.
Me and Mariah go back like babies with pacifiers.
So she comes in for the appointment. She sits down and I'm like, hey, before we get started, I got to ask you all the same questions I just asked you yesterday, you know, just to make sure nothing changes. It's just protocol. And she's like, okay, cool. So I get to asking her all the same questions. You know, everything's checking out. I'm like, hey, where did you go to high school? Did you graduate high school? Where were you born? Have you ever been diagnosed with ADHD, depression, anxiety? She's like, no. She's like, everything's like, no. So everything's going perfect. And then I get to the part where I have to ask her, have you ever been cited, charged, arrested, held, detained for questioning for any law violation to include juvenile or traffic tickets? So I'm waiting on her to respond like she's been responding for all the other questions, and she's just looking at me. So I'm like, is there something you want to say? And she's like, well, there's a little bit I gotta tell you. So I'm not even concerned, right? I'm like, Major's daughter, it probably can't be that much. Go ahead and tell me what's up. So she starts going, and the more she goes, the more I'm like, oh.
Me and Mariah go back like babies with pacifiers.
So remember, I'm a new recruiter, right? So I don't really know what to do. I've never done a waiver before, so I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. So the first thing I do, I call my boss. I'm like, hey, got this girl, Major's daughter. You know, I started out with that. Major's daughter, she's trying to join the Air Force, but she got a little bit of background. And he's like, what's a little bit of background? So I start going through the chart. He's like, oh. So he's like, is she around you right now? I'm like, yeah, she's right here. He's like, hey, can you go to somewhere private? So I go in the back and he's like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm trying to work this girl, trying to get in the Air Force. He's like, don't do that. I'm like, hold on now. I know she got a lot of charges, but she seems like a good kid. And he's like, yeah, but that's a lot of work. You don't want to do all that work. And I was like, I don't care about the work. You know, I ain't got nobody else to work, so I'll go ahead and put the work in. He's like, all right, man, I'm trying to give you a heads up. It probably won't get approved. I was like, well, you know what? I got to learn anyway, so let's go ahead and see what happens. So I got into the regs. So according to the regulations, we call our criminal offenses moral offenses, and we break those up into 5 different categories. The first one is a category 1, and these are terrible. Like, you're not gonna be able to join if you have a category 1 morals offense. This is like your Carol Baskins. Like, you killed somebody, bro. You're not gonna be able to join unless you were found not guilty for a category 1. If you were found not guilty, that basically means that the court found that you didn't do it. And that's not just for category 1s, that's for all different categories. And then you have your category 2 moral offenses. These are pretty heavy charges, but we can still get them cleared. It only takes one of these to constitute a waiver. So if you have one of these charges, your recruiter is going to need to do a waiver, and your recruiter can choose to do that waiver or not. If they don't like you, if they don't like your story, they can choose not to do the waiver. Also, some areas are super busy and they don't have time for waivers, so you got to keep that in mind as well. Then we move on to category 3 moral offenses. These are pretty heavy as well, but these are a lot easier to get cleared. It also only takes one of these to trigger a waiver. I think Mariah had like 4 of these. And then you have your category 4 moral offenses. Now these are a little lighter and they have different rules to trigger a waiver. So for a category 4 waiver, you can have 2 convictions or adverse adjudications in the last 3 years, or 3 or more convictions or adverse adjudications in a lifetime. So basically, if you had 2 of these in the last 3 years, it would require a waiver. If you had 3 or more of these in your life, this is going to require a waiver. And then we get down to the category 5. These are basically like traffic offenses, speeding, running stop signs, things like that. The rules for a category 5 waiver will be 6 or more in a 365-day period in the last 3 years, or you can have 5 of these along with 1 category 4 related offense in a 365-day period within the last 3 years. I know that's a little confusing, but these are really rare. If you get a category 5 waiver, man, you need to slow down. Also, something to keep in mind, even if something got dropped, dismissed, or whatever, you still have to let your recruiter know about it. That isn't something just because it got dropped or dismissed, it just goes away. And it will still require your recruiter to do a waiver. We call those determinations. It's basically saying, okay, it got dropped or dismissed, but something happened there. We got to look at it, we got to figure out what it was, and then our commander is going to determine whether or not you're qualified or not for the Air Force. So don't think just because it's dismissed or dropped, that's something you don't have to bring up to your recruiter. So I can't go into what the charges were, but I can say that she had a lot of category 2s, a lot of category 3s, and a lot of category 4s. No 5s, but all the rest. So in order for us to do this waiver, she had to go get all the records from her past. She had to go to the court, she had to go to the police department and gather all the records. She also had to get receipts to prove that she paid all the fines and there were no open cases. The crazy thing about it was she was a juvenile with some of these, and so because she was a juvenile, she got the stuff expunged. By the time she turned 18, the courts didn't have it anymore. So we had to get a letter from the court saying that they don't have the records anymore. And then we had to write letters. She basically had to write what happened, why it happened, why it would never happen again, and why she should be able to join the Air Force. And then I had to write a letter as well. I basically had to put my name on the line and vouch for her and say why I think she should be able to join the Air Force. So before I did this, I wanted to make sure I was doing right. So I asked her like, hey, is this what you want to do? She basically gave me a story saying how she feels like if she stays here, she won't be able to change. So she needs a new environment for her to go out there and be great. So I felt that. I was like, all right, let me go ahead and vouch for you. It was that easy for me. You know, I got a big heart. And lastly, my flight chief had to write a letter. He also had to write a letter vouching for her, saying that she was good for the Air Force. So we get everything together. We get the letters, we get the court records, the police records, the receipts of payment, and we submit all this stuff up for my commander to sign off. And it gets kicked back for something I didn't catch. When she came to me, she had just got off of probation. According to the regs, she had to wait 90 days from the date of her probation to end before she was eligible to join. So now we're just waiting. So 90 days passes, and then we submit the waiver back up again. And then I get a phone call from my operations. So they were like, just letting you know, the commander may not approve it. So the commander gets the waiver, and then he calls my flight chief. At this point, my flight chief is vouching for her too because he's known her for all this time. So he thinks she's a good kid too. So then the commander's like, well, you know what? Everybody's saying she's a good kid. I want to talk to her and see. So they talk for maybe 5 minutes. He gets off the phone, and then I get a notification that her waiver was approved. So the story didn't stop there. She really wanted to prove to herself and to me and everyone who was involved in the process that it wasn't a waste of time. So she went to basic training and she ended up graduating top female for PT. Basically, she was more in shape than all the other females there. She was crushing it. She gets to her base and she immediately joined the honor guard, where she was basically doing memorial services and honoring all the vets who passed in her local area, which later helped her get BTZ, which is below the zone airman. It helped her promote to senior airman faster. By promoting to senior airman faster, it gave her an opportunity to test for staff sergeant quicker, and she made staff sergeant her first time through. She also got her CCAF, which is an Associate of Applied Science degree that the Air Force gives, and she's also working on her bachelor's. She's crushing it. It's one of the worst waivers that I did, but it's also one of the proudest moments that I had as a recruiter. If you were disqualified for medical reasons, you can watch this video and it will tell you all about how to get yourself qualified medically for the Air Force. I hope you guys found value in this video. Stay beautiful, stay classy, and until next time, check me out.